Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. This is a little biographical essay on Grandizo Munis. Um, it's by Augustin Guillamon. Augustin Guillamon. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Let's look it up.
Agustin Guillamon. Agustin Guillamon.
Agustin Guillamon. And now this is translated from French with a Google Translator. Um, I feel like this is imperfect, but it's better than nothing. The resources on Munis online are pretty slim. Um, but he's a very, very important figure historically, I think. Um, what was I also going to say? This is originally from the Leon Trotsky notebooks, Cahiers Leon Trotsky, which is a journal of like Trotsky studies in France. Um, the description says, article by Agustin Guillamon, published in Cahiers Leon Trotsky in May 1993. We had already published this article in Spanish here in a revised version in 2009. After a short and very hostile obituary of Munis published there in their number 38 in June 1989, the Notebooks de Bruet therefore, quote, made up for it with this reference article. Agustin Guillamon also wrote the notice of Grandizo Munis for Mitran. That makes sense. I think Pierre Bruet is pretty uh, orthodox Trotskyist. So it would make sense that his journal is kind of hostile to people who break with Trotsky on the Russian question, like Munis does. So, like I said, this translation might be terrible, but it's better than nothing. So, Manuel Fernandez Grandizo lived from 1911 to 1984, better known by his pseudonym G. Munis, was born in Extremadura in Llerena. Munis's parents emigrated to Mexico when Munis was a child. Munis began his political activities at a very young age. In Mexico, Munis contributed to the clandestine founding of the Trotskyist opposition. Arrested at a meeting, Munis was expelled from the country. Arriving in the peninsula, Munis intervened in the peasant strikes of Llerena in 1928. Munis was also one of the founders of the left communist opposition in Spain, that is, the international organization promoted in France by Leon Trotsky. Munis collaborated with the press of the communist left of Spain, new name of the communist opposition, La Antorcha, El Soviet Comunismo. From 1932 to 1933, Munis was a member of the LaCroix Group. At the end of Munis's military service, Munis was designated at the beginning of 1934 as representative of the communist left in the Workers' Alliance of Madrid. After the October insurrection, Munis was imprisoned. A supporter of entrism in the Socialist Youth, as proposed by Trotsky, Munis followed the tendency led by Fersen and Esteban Bilbao. I'm assuming that's how you say it. I'm gonna look up these people on the Google. Yeah. Not really seeing anything for this person. Anyway, The tendency of Andrunin and Andrade went towards the fusion of the communist left with the Bloc Obrère et Camperol (BOC), a Marxist and Catalanist party, to found in September 1935 the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification, the POUM. The Trotskyist interest tactics completely failed when the socialist youth merged with the communists. Like right there, there's a typo. That's my best I can make out of it right there. The Trotsky, what it actually says on the page is, the Trotskyist interest tactics completely failed when the socialist youth merged and communists, which doesn't make sense. Footnote. The tendency that opposed the merger with the BOC within the ICE was formed by Esteban Bilbao, Thersen, and Munis. It did not manage to gather more than a dozen militants. Its entry into the PSOE did not involve the creation of any faction and did not have the slightest weight. Thus, it can be affirmed and strongly emphasized that from September 1935 to November 1936, Munis remained without a party in a crucial historical period. End footnote. New section, the Civil War. At the beginning of 1936, Munis went to Mexico, from where he returned upon learning of the military uprising and the workers' insurrection of July. Munis participated with his comrades in the fighting on the Madrid front in the ranks of the socialist militias. In November 1936, Munis founded a new organization in Barcelona, the Bolshevik-Leninist section of Spain, Pro-Fourth International. The Trotskyists were few in number in Spain, divided into two rival organizations, and moreover, the Party of Marxist Unification have rejected their request to organize themselves into a faction within it. The two existing Trotskyist groups, which included mainly foreign militants, were known by the names of their respective publications, La Voix Leninista and El Soviet. La Voix Leninista was the official group formed by Munis, Jaime Fernandez, Costa, Cid, the German Moulin, the French surrealist poet Benjamin Paré, the Italians Carlini and Leonello Guido, the Cuban surrealist poet Juan Brea, among others. The Soviet was their heterodox group. La Soviet, I'm assuming that's what's being referred to, was the heterodox group that followed the dissidents Raymond Molinier and Pierre Franck, who published in France the weekly La Commune. The group was led by the Italian Nico di Bartolomeo, known by the pseudonym Fosco, and who, due to a misunderstanding, was appointed by the POUM something like delegate for the reception and control of foreigners, a position he held from July to September. He even wrote an article in La Battaglia, the organ of the POUM. The organization founded by Munis published a bulletin from January 1937, which in April took the name of La Voix Leninista, in which the CNT and POUM were criticized for their collaboration with the government of the Republican bourgeoisie at a time when it was necessary to fight for the formation of a revolutionary workers' front, to take power, make the revolution, and win the war. It's interesting that this becomes like the point, right? It's my understanding, at least. I mean, I'm not an expert, but like it seemed like what Trotsky was advocating for his followers to do in Spain at this time was to enter the Socialist Party as a faction, which would have meant collaborating with the government. Anyway, In May 1937, a spontaneous workers' insurrection took place in defense of the revolutionary conquest of July. At the alarming news of the police attack at the Telefonica building managed by the unions, the control patrols and the neighborhood defense committees built barricades and quickly took control of the city. Parenthesis, Barcelona. CLT, end parenthesis. I don't know what CLT means. With the exception of the center. In this disputed city center, there were two camps, each on one side of the barricade. On one side, the Republican security forces of the Generalitat and its Pyrenean militias, the anti-Senatista nationalists of the Estat Català, and the PSUC, on the other, the CNT and the POUM, but above all, the armed workers. Only the group of Friends of Durruti and the Trotskyists of La Vaz Leninista launched leaflets that fought for the continuation of the struggle and opposed a ceasefire. They were the only organizations that tried to give a revolutionary direction to the spontaneous movement of the workers. The latter, overwhelmingly CNTists, resisted the pacificating and defeatist slogans of their own leaders, but ended up giving in to the absence of a revolutionary alternative on the part of the CNT. The Spanish Trotskyists, for their part, lacked organization. Their numbers were tiny. Footnote. It is interesting to get an idea of the number of militants of the main revolutionary organizations of May 37th without this invalidating in any way their political positions. Group of Friends of Durruti from 4 to 5,000. The Trotskyists of La Vaz from 15 to 30. Trotskyists from La Soviet from 8 to 10. Cell 72 of the POUM about 10. The number indicated for the ADD refers to the number of cards distributed before May 37th, according to the data extracted from the letter from Balias to Bulletin of the 24th, 1940, of June 24th, 1946, confirmed by Jordi Arquer in his history of the group of Friends of Durruti. The data on the Trotskyist organizations are extracted from the book by Mintz and Pesina, Los Amigos de Durruti, Los Trotskyistas y los Sucesos de Mayo. Madrid, 1978. The figures in cell 72 of the POUM of the author's questionnaire to Reboul, December 16, 1985. End footnote. The Spanish Trotskyists, for their part, lacked organization, their numbers were tiny, and their influence on the working class non-existent. We can affirm that their activity was almost entirely limited to the publication of their press and the leaflets launched in May, nor can we speak of any collaboration or contact of any kind between the Friends of Durruti and the Bolshevik-Leninist section, which simply coincided in May in the streets with a similar appeal addressed to the workers. Footnote. The text of the Friends of Durruti leaflet read, quote, "Workers, a revolutionary junta, shoot the guilty, disarm all armed bodies, socialize the economy, dissolution of the political parties that have attacked the working class. We will not abandon the streets. The revolution above all. We salute the comrades of the POUM who fraternize with us in the streets. Long live the social revolution. Down with the counter-revolution." End quote. Friends of Durruti. La Batalla, May 6, 1937. El Amigo del Pueblo, July 20th, 1937. The text of the group led by Munis read, quote, "Long live the revolutionary offensive, no compromise, disarmament of the GNR and the reactionary assault guard. The moment is decisive. Next time it will be too late. General strike in all industries not working for the war until the resignation of the reactionary government. Only proletarian power can ensure military victory. Quote, total arming of the working class. Long live unity of action. Long live the revolutionary front of the proletariat. In the workshops, factories, on the barricades, etc., revolutionary defense committees, end quote. Munis. Munis's group, at least. Workers' struggle, June 10th, 1937, end footnote. As for the creation in the POUM of a left-wing fraction favorable to revolutionary theses, despite repeated invitations in La Voix Leniniste, one cannot speak of contact or practical collaboration. Only Joseph Riboul, administrator of La Bataille and member of the Central Committee, author of Countertheses, prepared for the POUM Congress, very critical of the POUMist collaboration with the government of the Generalitat, had presented to the executive committee of his party a plan of Barcelona in which he detailed and defended the seizure of power, manu militari, in the days of May. This plan was rejected by Nin, Andrade, and Gorkin, who considered that it was not a military problem, but a political problem. Josep Riboul's contacts with Jaime Balius did not give anything practical. Footnote. Interview with Munis by the author in Barcelona on November 16, 1984. Was there collaboration between the BL section and the revolutionary left groups like the Friends of Durruti or Riboul, who criticized the executive committee of the POUM and Nin? I don't remember these things. I guess this is Munis speaking. I don't remember these things. I don't keep the details in mind, but of course, I didn't know anything about the Friends of Durruti or Riboul or all that before May, and after the events, and the interviewer asks, and after the events of May? Afterwards, I tried to contact Riboul in France to see if we could act together, but he had regressed. He collaborated during the war with Frank Tireur. He entered the resistance, and we considered the resistance as one of the camps of the imperialist war in which revolutionaries should not participate. End quote. End footnote. Footnote. Questions from Guillamon to Riboul on the 16th of December, 1985. And the interviewer asks, Guillamon asks, did Cell 72 want to establish contacts with other groups with the intention of creating a revolutionary front, that is, with the Friends of Durruti, the Libertarian Youth, Balias, Munis, and other sectors of the POUM? The only contacts with the eight and Munis and no. Riboul responds, the only contacts with the ADD took place during the May days, but the small numerical importance of this group, without links to the base and the modest representatives of Cell 72, did not allow us to reach a practical agreement, as we would have liked by addressing a common manifesto to the workers in struggle. I do not remember having spoken to Munis before the end of the exile in Paris about conversations without particular importance. The excessive importance proven to the contact between Balius and Moulin, the result more of imagination than of proof, has led authors like Clara and Pavel Talman to the idea of an irresistible influence of Moulin on Balius's thought. This seems to me to be totally unfounded. Even a cursory reading of the Amigo del Pueblo is enough to see that Balius and the ADD were neither Marxist nor influenced in any way by Marxism. Balius, for his part, energetically rejects the idea that there's any influence of the POUM or the Trotskyists in the ADD. I don't know what the ADD is that's being referenced here, but just roll with it. Thus, May 37th did not find a revolutionary leadership capable of transforming the spontaneous insurrection into a revolution, as had not happened in July 1936. Neither in July nor in May was the problem of the seizure of power by the working class posed. Munis stated that in Spain in July 1936, a situation of dual power had been created between the Republican government and the new organs of workers' power, the committees. Due to the absence of a revolutionary party capable of unifying and strengthening these committees on a national scale, the counter-revolution, ideologically embodied by Stalinism and particularly by the Popular Front, advanced step by step against the revolutionary conquest of July until in May 1937 it dealt the definitive blow to the nerve center of the revolution, the Barcelona working class. The Stalinist repression after the fall of the government of Largo Caballero obtained the outlawing and trial of the POUM, but also the Friends of the Rudi and the BL section, the Bolshevik-Leninist section. The assassination of the anarchists Berneri, Barbieri, and many others less known was followed by the disappearance and assassination of Pumis, Anjunin, and Landau, I think that's Kurt Landau, but also the comrades of Munis, Moulin, Hans Freund, the former secretary of Trotsky, Erwin Wolf, and Carrasco, personal friend of Munis since his military service. Munis himself, along with the majority of the militants of the Bolshevik-Leninist group, was imprisoned in February 1938. Footnote. The detention, events, and trial of the Bolshevik-Leninist activists can be followed in detail in the 1938 issues of La Lutte Ouvrière. I have no idea if that's in French or Spanish. So I might be pronouncing that wrong if it's not in Spanish. Munis himself, along with the majority of the militants of the Bolshevik-Leninist group, was imprisoned in... Did I say end footnote? Fuck. Munis himself, along with the majority of the militants of the Bolshevik-Leninist group, was imprisoned in February 1938. They were accused of sabotage and espionage in the service of Franco, of planning the assassination of Negrin, La Pasionaria, Diaz, Comorera, Prieto, and many others, as well as the assassination of the Russian captain Narvich, an agent infiltrated into the POUM. They were tried by a semi-military court, behind closed doors and initially without legal defense. The prosecutor demanded the death penalty against Munis, Carlini, and Jaime Fernandez Rodriguez. International pressure, as well as the will of the authorities that the one that was being prepared against the POUM be rejected, caused the session to be adjourned until January 21st, 1939. Exclamation point. I don't know what that means. Imprisoned in the Mont Huich Castle in death row, Munis and Carlini managed to escape at the last moment. They crossed the border with the bulk of the Republican refugees who were fleeing the advance of Franco's troops. Years later, already in exile, Munis learned confidentially of the existence of a directive to execute all revolutionary prisoners before crossing the border. In Paris, La Lutte Ouvrière, I think what I said earlier was French. In Paris, La Lutte Ouvrière, organ of the French section of the Fourth International, published an interview with Munis in its issues of February 24th and March 3rd, 1939. Munis explained the fall of Barcelona without resistance by the fact that the war had lost its meaning for the workers since May 1937. According to his analysis, the Spanish Revolution was deliberately destroyed by Moscow and its Stalinist followers in Spain. New section, Mexican exile. At the end of 1939, Munis took over the leadership of Mexico. He established a close personal relationship with Leon Trotsky and his wife, Natalia Sedova. Trotsky put Munis in charge of the Mexican section. In May 1940, Munis participated in what was called the, quote, Alarm Conference of the Fourth International. In August 1940, after Trotsky's assassination, at whose funeral Munis spoke, Munis repeatedly intervened in the trial of the assassin as a representative of the civil party. Footnote. Text of his speech in La Révolution, number 6/7, August-September 1940. End footnote. Munis resolutely confronted the Stalinist parliamentarians, as well as the Stalinist press campaign that accused Munis, Victor Serge, Gorkin, and Pivert of being Gestapo agents. Despite the death threat launched against him by the Stalinists, he challenged the Mexican deputies who slandered him to give up their parliamentary immunity to face him in court. From 1941, Munis allied himself with Benjamin Paré, also exiled in Mexico, with Natalia Sedova, in their criticism of the Socialist Workers' Party, the Trotskyist Party of the United States, which, according to them, editor's note, took the side of one of the camps of the imperialist war, anti-fascism. Footnote. Munis, the Socialist Workers' Party and the Imperialist War. End footnote. The divergences were accentuated by the criticism of the Spanish group to the French and English parties, supported by the leadership of the Fourth International, which took positions favorable to participation in the different national resistances against the Nazis. The immense merit of Munis, Paré, and Natalia was in the denunciation of the policy of defense of the degenerated worker state of the USSR, together with the refusal to support the anti-fascist national resistances. The military camp of the Allies, whether Russian, American, French, or English, was neither better nor worse than that of the Nazis. Abandoning the traditional Marxist position of neutrality in the imperialist war, that is to say, opting for one of the camps in conflict, supposed the abandonment of any revolutionary perspective of class struggle and transformation of the imperialist war into a civil war. The advance of the Russian troops did not imply any progress of the revolution, but on the contrary, the expansion of Stalinism, that is to say, of the triumphant counter-revolution in Russia, which had already strangled the Spanish Revolution for its foreign policy, and which, in the course of its military conquest, repressed all revolutionary manifestations in Poland, Finland, or Romania. Moreover, Munis, Paré, and Natalia also rejected the slogan of fighting Nazism and defending democracy as counter-revolutionary. The choice is not to be fascism or democracy, but communism or barbarism, the same alternative defended by Rosa Luxemburg and Lenin during the First World War. The divergences between the Spanish group and the leadership of the Fourth International continued to deepen insurmountably. The positions of Munis, Paré, and Natalia found an echo in various sections of the Fourth International. In Italy, the POC, led by Romeo Mangano. In France, the Penetier-Gallien tendency of the PCI, as well as the majority of the English and Greek sections. The Spanish group in Mexico published from February 1943 a publication of a theoretical nature entitled Contra la Corriente, intended to defend the principles of Marxist internationalism, which from March 1945 was replaced by a new publication of a more practical and combative nature entitled Revolucion. In the Mexican publishing house of the same name, Munis and Paré, the latter under the pseudonym Peralta, published various pamphlets in which they developed their theories on the nature of the Russian state defined as state capitalism, on the imperialist war and the role of revolutionaries, on the Spanish Civil War and the counter-revolutionary role of the Russian state. On the there's a typo here. No. In June 1947, Munis, Perret, and Natalia Sadova began a process of rupture with two texts that harshly criticized the Trotskyist leadership: the open letter to the International Communist Party, which is the Party of France, PCI, the French section of the Fourth International, and the Fourth International in danger, prepared for internal discussion at the World Congress. New section. From the fight against Francoism to the founding of the FOR. It was in 1948, when Munis and Perret had already settled in France, that the definitive break with Trotskyism took place in the Second Congress of the Fourth International. The Congress refused to condemn the participation of revolutionaries in national defense, that is, in the resistance, and approved a resolution that presented the EU-USSR rivalry as the main world contradiction. This, plus the slogan of unconditional defense of Russia, because, despite everything, it was considered a degenerated worker state, presupposed the defense of Stalinism, and what was even more serious, it presupposed the substitution of the fundamental Marxist contradiction of the class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat by the nationalist one of support for the USSR in its rivalry with the United States. Munis described these positions of the Second Congress of the Fourth International as aberrant, and drew up a document of rupture with Trotskyism on the part of the Spanish section, in which he deepened and confirmed the definition of Russia as state capitalist without any socialist vestige, and as an imperialist power. Footnote. Internationalist Communist Group, explicación y llamamiento a los militantes, grupos y secciones de la, I'm not sure how to say Fourth International. Cuatro International. That's probably Thor International, actually. That's what I said. Anyway, end footnote. The Spanish Trotskyists exiled in France had published Comunismo in the clandestiny of the Hitlerian occupation, with the idea of orienting the Spaniards in their collaboration with the French masses in a class sense. From the beginning of 1945, they began the publication of a printed periodical entitled Lucha de Clases, in which they defended the classical Marxist alternative, socialism or barbarism, in the face of the bourgeois alternative defending democracy in the face of fascism. The reorganization of the group in France was the first step for the beginning of the clandestine struggle in Spain. The group managed to establish a small infrastructure in Barcelona. They published and distributed some pamphlets and tracts in which they denounced the horrors and the true nature of Spanish Stalinism and the fascist dictatorship. In March 1951, during the general strike of the Barcelona trams, the group launched leaflets in which it defended the spontaneous nature of the movement against Francoist propaganda that attributed them to the Masons and Communists paid with gold from Moscow. It was because of these leaflets and brochures that denounced the counter-revolutionary policy of the Stalinists in Spain that Munis and several of his comrades were sentenced to 10 years in prison. They had been arrested on the first anniversary of the tram strike. On his release from prison in 1958, Munis resumed his political activity in France. Wait, was he in Spain during this? I don't know. Or was he jailed in France? I don't know, that wouldn't make sense, right? I have no idea. It was because of these leaflets and brochures that denounced the counter-revolutionary policy of the Stalinists in Spain that Munis and several of his comrades were sentenced to 10 years in prison. They had been arrested on the first anniversary of his political activity in France. With Benjamin Paré, the French surrealist poet, and other old comrades in the struggle, Munis founded the group FOR, Fomento Obrero Revolucionario, in which he was active until his death, and which from 1958 to the present day publishes Alarma. Benjamin Paré died in 1959. I'm not sure when this article, probably said at the beginning, I don't know when this article was published. Munis was expelled from France. Munis lived for some years in Milan, where he made contact with groups and ideas of the Italian communist left, Bordigas and close associates, Munis had long and extensive discussions with Onorato Daman, the leader of the Battaglia Comunista group, from which a mutual respect and sympathy was born. The theses of FOR were disseminated in Italy by the magazine Azione Comunista. It was in Milan that Munis wrote two of his most important theoretical texts, Los Sindicatos contra Revolución in 1960 and Second Communist Manifesto in 1961. New section, Unions Against the Revolution. In the book devoted to trade unionism, Munis continued the historical analysis of trade unionism begun by the late Paré, brilliantly defining it as a fundamental organ of the capitalist system within the proletariat. For Munis and Paré, the trade union is inconceivable without wage labor, which in turn presupposes the existence of capital, and the function of the trade union is to regulate the sale of labor power, and this function has become indispensable to the contemporary capitalist order, hence their current ever-growing importance. Everywhere it is complementary structures of the state apparatus. The trade unions are moving, according to Munis, from a phase of free competition between supply and demand to a phase of framing the supply of labor with a view to demand. Or, what is the same, the unions have abandoned their function of intermediary between the purchase and sale of the commodity labor power for that of rigid control of the commodity by a union transformed into a state apparatus or a capitalist monopoly. In fact, in many countries, as Munis noted, the unions have become anonymous investment companies, with banks and companies belonging to the unions, which directly or indirectly participated in capitalist profits. The unions begin to dictate directly, in the name of capital, all the conditions of work. Munis, from a revolutionary perspective, asserted that any attempt to give a subversive orientation to the unions was doomed to failure. The transition to socialism would necessarily imply the destruction of the unions. Munis explained the decline in union membership by the distrust and repugnance of the workers. They therefore only go to the union in the event of conflict or violation of their rights established by capitalist legislation, as they go to a police station in the event of theft or assault. Munis asserted that the unions had a life of their own, with no more need of the working class than to use the working class as a docile element of maneuver for the defense of its own ideological corporate institutional interest that it presupposes. Capital is not an owner but an economic notion, a social relationship, that which is established between the class that buys labor power and the non-owner class that is obliged to sell its labor power because that non-owner class is the labor power is its only means of subsistence. The unions are the intermediary in this act of buying and selling the commodity labor power and adapt perfectly to the process of monopolistic concentration of capital. Their destiny is linked to that of capital, not to that of the revolution. The greater the monopolistic concentration of capital, the greater the union power. Munis affirmed that the workers' leaders could, through the suppression of the private capitalist, present themselves as the solution to social contradictions. But this would mean the passage to a society of greater exploitation. New section: The Russian Revolution, Stalinism, and State Capitalism. In his book, Pro Segundo Manifesto Comunista, Munis studied the Russian Revolution and its trajectory up to Stalinism. He affirmed that the Russian Revolution was a political revolution, not a socialist revolution, but a permanent one, with the meaning that Trotsky gave to the term in his books 1905 and the Permanent Revolution, and Lenin in his April Theses. A revolution that linked the destruction of feudal and czar society with the first tasks of the bourgeois revolution, assembled by socialist means. But the victory of the communist revolution in Europe was necessary. The failure of the international extension of the revolution, isolated and cornered in Russia, forced the establishment of the new economic policy and state capitalism that it included, even under the control of the proletariat. The new economic policy actually meant the end of the permanent revolution and the beginning of a revolutionary retreat. The Stalinist counter-revolution gave Russia a state capitalism as imperialist as its American rival, although much weaker. The great lie that divided and chained the international workers' movement was to present this Russian state capitalism as socialism. All the communist parties played in their respective countries an invaluable counter-revolutionary role for international capitalism. Munis described the Fourth International and the various national communist revolutions in the countries of Eastern Europe, in China, Cuba, Algeria, etc., as advance points of the extension of the counter-revolution that had begun. And in the heart of the national liberation struggles in the 60s, he affirmed that all national struggle was reactionary. Munis's text, signed FOR, concluded with the proclamation of a program that united the key demands of the economic struggle of the working class, summarized in the formula, quote, work less, earn more, end quote, and political demands such as freedom of the press, of strike, of assembly, and of organization, outside of parties and unions, to end with programmatic communist objectives such as the abolition of wage labor, the abolition of borders, and the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, inseparable from the most demanding democracy within the working masses. New section. From May 1968 to his death. After writing these two books, which express the summit of his thought, Munis was able to settle down again in France. In 1966, in 1966, an attempt was made to relaunch the group in Francoist Spain, and the FOR launched an appeal to this effect. Munis continued his work as an organizer in the FOR and as a propagandist and theoretician. From 1966 to 1972, he participated in various initiatives and debates with the different revolutionary currents that arose from the social and political turmoil that May 1968 raised in France and in autumn of 1969 in Italy. Munis's revolutionary past and his innovative theoretical work with regard to trade unionism, Stalinism, and state capitalism gave Munis a certain prestige, and many of his theoretical contributions were taken up and appropriated by various tendencies and political parties. The prestige did not turn into a fashion or a passing celebrity of the Marcuse type, but into a solid theoretical support in the quagmire and confusion that 50 years of Stalinist counter-revolution had imprinted on Marxist thought. In 1975, Spartacus published in French a new book by Munis that deepened and synthesized his critiques of Stalinism and Russian state capitalism. And that's called Party State Stalinism Revolution, right? What it says? Yeah, Party State Stalinism Revolution. End footnote. Between 1973 and 1976, he published very important theoretical articles in Alarma, the organ of the FOR. In the one published in 1973 entitled Revolutionary Class, Political Organization, and Dictatorship of the Proletariat, he returned to the old theme developed by Lenin in What Is to Be Done, on the relationship between the mass and the political vanguard, and the introduction of revolutionary consciousness into the working class by a minority. The encyclopedic exposition that Munis gives of the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat that the different Marxist currents developed throughout history, from Lenin and Otto Rühle to the Bordigists and the Councilists, as well as the rigorous criticism to which he subjects them, is extremely interesting. In 1964, a sharp critique of a specific group by Munis appeared in Alarma, in which he debated the character of the decadence of capitalism and as well as the existence or not of an economic crisis of overproduction and the positive or negative influence that a revolutionary uprising would have. Munis denied the existence of an economic crisis of overproduction and further denied that, if it occurred, it could be the starting point of a revolutionary situation. In 1976, Munis published in Alarma an article entitled Revolutionary Consciousness and Class for Oneself, which completed and enriched the themes treated in the two articles that we have just commented on. New section, Transition and Reaffirmation. Between 1977 and 1981, with the beginning of the democratic transition, a new revival of FOR began in Spain. In April 1977, number 1 of the third series of Alarma appeared, whose publication had begun in 1958. Also from 1977 is dated Reafirmación as an epilogue to the new edition that the Zero ZYX House made of its book on the Spanish Civil War. In his reaffirmation, Munis, although he revised some aspects of the book published in 1948, makes an apology for the Spanish Revolution, which he considers more profound than the Russian Revolution. For Munis, the July 36 insurrection and the events of May 37 are the culmination of the world revolutionary wave that began in Russia in 1917. Munis never considered that May 37 was a fratricidal struggle between workers, but remained faithful to his Trotskyist analysis of the 1930s. He affirmed and reaffirms that in Spain the revolution failed for lack of a revolutionary party. In July 1936, the unarmed workers defeated the capitalist army. In May 1937, the armed workers faced the counter-revolution embodied by the Communist Party, but they were defeated by their own leaders, by their own trade union and political organizations. Without revolutionary theory, there is no revolution. Without a revolutionary party, any insurrection is doomed to defeat. In July 36, the working class was unarmed, but it had clear political objectives: to confront fascism and military uprising. The absence of a revolutionary party produced a paradoxical historical situation. The armed working class was master of the streets and left the state apparatus in the hands of the Republican bourgeoisie. In May 1937, the armed working class wanted the revolutionary conquest of July 1936, but it was politically disarmed. No mass workers' organizations set the goal of taking power. The minority organizations that did so were without authority, outlawed, and persecuted. The insurrection won but failed politically. Franco did not need to crush the revolution. The Stalinists and Republicans had already done so. While devoting himself to his work as organizer of the FOR, which came to have sections in the US and Greece. In addition to the Spanish and French, Munis never abandoned his theoretical work. In 1983, he published a pamphlet criticizing Trotskyist groups. Footnote: Munis Análisis de un vacío. 50 años después del trotskyism. Where am I? End footnote. In February 1986, Munis participated in the revolutionary assessment days of the Spanish Civil War, convened by the FLR with the participation of activists belonging to a very wide range of political currents. At the time of Munis's death, he left us a new, as yet unpublished book devoted to the study of the state and the problems posed by its suppression in a communist society. New section, Epilogue. Bad times are running and worse winds are blowing for history. The transition from fascism to democracy was based on consensus and forgetting. Today, a deeply apathetic, amnesic, uncritical, depoliticized, and indifferent society makes debate, criticism, theoretical research, the confrontation of ideas and political thought unpopular, or at least out of fashion. But if in addition to this attitude weighs on our yesterday, if it stirs the memory of a recent historical past, whether we like it or not, it configures and determines us, and then inevitably we find ourselves swimming against the current. Munis died unknown in Paris on February 4th, 1989. The 20th century was prodigal in wars and revolutions, in technical progress and barbaric acts, in political ideologies and aberrations. One of the phenomena that marked our century was Stalinism. In the middle of a world war, when no number had yet been assigned, the victory of the October Revolution seemed to confirm and place within reach a new world for the disinherited of the earth. In the name of communism, thousands of men in all countries would risk their lives in a struggle and a faith that promised the liberation of the oppressed, the building of paradise on earth. But reality and history, with its storms and miseries, have changed this ideal into a concentration camp, the faith into an inquisition, this hope into a frustration, this flight into betrayal, this communism into an even more ferocious state capitalism, this paradise into a ... The biography of political thought. So is that like a quote? I don't know. It seemed like a quote, but there was no introductory sign or like any index to say it was a quote. The biography and political thought of Munis are a rock in this landscape of shifting sands. Munis was a militant, always faithful to the fight of his class, and extremely lucid in his analysis of trade unionism and Stalinism. Munis was one of the rare Marxists of his generation crushed by Stalinism, who knew how to resist the assault of the counter-revolution. Such was Munis. His death was not news. He leaves us as a legacy an invaluable theoretical work that allows us to understand the present and build the future. He was a Marxist theoretician of the same caliber as activists such as Onorato Dahmen, Amadeo Bordiga, Paul Matic, Karl Korsch, Ottorino Perrone, Bruno Maffei, Anton Pannekoek, or Henk Kannemeyer. That is to say, a full member of that generation of Marxist theoreticians and activists who, in the most adverse circumstances, exiled, persecuted, in total poverty, slandered or threatened with death, knew how to continue and enrich the Marxist analysis of social reality and maintain the link with the generation of Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg. This Marxist thought, deeply original and rigorous, was also written in a Castilian of the purest and most beautiful popular roots, which seems sculpted in the literary language of our golden century. The book by Munis and Perret on the unions has only appeared in French, and his posthumous work on the state has not even been published. However, the complete works of Benjamin Perret have been published in France. It's not strange that in Spain, one of the most interesting and innovative Marxist thinkers of our century is ignored, nor is it uncommon for Munis's books published in Castilian to be practically unknown, even to specialists in contemporary history and political thought. It is obvious that ignorance, forgetfulness, and disdain for what is ignored are the great virtues of post-Franco society and culture. He who ignores the past and does not understand the present cannot fight for the future. History does not forget. He who forgets renounces the signs of his identity. All right, and that's the end of this piece on Grandizo Munis. There's a few bumps in the road, some awkward phrases, some gaps, some typos and stuff. But I think at least I did, I learned a lot about his life from reading this. Thanks for listening.